Okay, so last paragraph of 117 is where we left off, chapter 8, Two Wives. It says here, some of the snags you will encounter are irritation, hurt feelings, and resentments. This is what they're starting to talk about as you got somebody in your life who is in the recovery process. Okay, there's three states, as I see it from what I've read in here, that we can be in as alcoholics. You can either be one who is still drinking and sick and suffering, okay? Or you can be recovering. We hear there's a lot of ingers around. I've heard a lot, and I used to be an inger for a long time until I learned that you actually recover. You get out of the inger situation, but you're recovering until you have recovered, right? So you're recovering until you have a spiritual experience, which the book tells us will have happened by the time you're halfway through step 9. Then you are recovered, not recovering. So you're in one of these three situations. And here they're talking about somebody who's recovering. They're not talking about living with somebody who's still drinking. They're talking about just the beginnings of living with somebody who's recovering. And what are you going to run across? Irritation, hurt feelings, resentments, irritation. That's about me. Hurt feelings. That's about me. Resentments. That's about me. Selfishness, self-centeredness. Your husband will sometimes be unreasonable and you will want to criticize. Starting from a speck on the domestic horizon, great thunder clouds of dispute may gather. These family dissensions are very dangerous, especially to your husband. Why? Often you may carry the burden of avoiding them or keeping them under control. Often you're going to carry that burden. What they're saying is if there's an argument, the burden's going to be on you often to back off and back down. Why should it be on them? Especially if he's wrong. Why should it be on me to back down? Well, let me tell you what they got to say about this. But underline and highlight this. Never forget. Somebody's going to have to teach you this if you're not to forget it, right? So it says, never forget that resentment is a deadly hazard to the alcoholic. Go back to page 64. If they say remember, we must have taught them that at some point, right? That resentment is a deadly hazard. Page 64, last paragraph. Resentment, in fact, is the number one offender, and it destroys more alcoholics than anything. There is nothing that's going to be more dangerous to somebody new who is recovering than resentment. In fact, there's nothing more dangerous to somebody who's recovered than resentment, because we've learned what happened. Number one is alcoholics were dependent on what? God. And we've learned that if we carry resentment, we shut ourselves off from the sunlight of the Spirit. So now we're in charge of our own life that we don't seem to be very good at managing, right? So resentment's number one. So it's not going to be your fault if he drinks. Just understand that if this resentment carries on in an alcoholic, he is shut off from whatever hope that he may have as an alcoholic. So the burden may be on you of dealing with this sick person. And it told us over and over, do not forget, remind that he is a sick, or she is a sick person. Talks about that over and over and over. We have to look at alcoholics as sick people. We do not mean that you have to agree with your husband whenever there's an honest difference in opinion. Just be careful not to disagree in a resentful or critical spirit. Again, these are hard things to get across to somebody probably in Al-Anon or not in Al-Anon, but spouses of or loved ones. Don't argue with them. Don't ever get him upset, no matter what he says or does. We read that one, right? But if you go through the points in this book, it tells why and what the dangers are. Then at least you can make an educated decision. You want to argue with them, knock yourself out, right? But at least you know the dangers of doing so because you know the nature of the illness. Didn't they say that a lot of the things that they had done, the authors of this section, they said that they rose out of ignorance of alcoholism? That's what they're talking about. They didn't understand this piece. They didn't understand this and many others. So this is one that we need to understand. And again, this isn't coming, those of you that are working with other people, this is for us. This, you can clearly see this chapter is for us, because I'll not only, one other point I want to hit, you go back to the doctor's opinion in the very beginning on page XXV. That is the first page of the doctor's opinion. And in let's see here, one, two, three paragraphs up from the bottom. And this is written by the doctor, not from the authors, not from the alcoholics. He says, he's talking about Bill Wilson. In the course of his third treatment, he acquired ideas concerning a possible means of recovery. As part of his rehabilitation, he commenced to present his conceptions to other alcoholics. And the third thing Bill did was impress upon them that they must do likewise with others. So that's what they were doing. And this is what the doctor says. This is what he sees happening. He says, this has become the basis of a rapidly growing fellowship of these men and their families. Basis. Basis is defined as a fixed pattern of doing things. Fixed is defined as not subject to change or fluctuate. Of this fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous, these men and their families are part of the fellowship that is fixed, not subject to change. Do we get that? That's the basis of how this works. We work with the family members. It's mentioned over and over and over again. So we're going to need to know what to inform them about. Not only do we work with the alcoholic, we work with the family if they're interested. I mean, at least we're told in the very beginning, the very first thing we read in chapter 7 that we do when we meet an alcoholic is one, we find out if they really want to quit. And it goes into talking about, it's not just the lip service, it's do they really want to quit? You know, we're pretty good at mowing through that and figuring that out because we're pretty good at manipulation ourselves. So we can usually figure out if somebody really wants to quit. And if they really want to quit, then the very second thing we do is we don't get them into doing steps. The very second thing it says on the top of page 90, it says the first thing we do is we have a talk with the person closest to them. So at least in that talk, two things are to be accomplished. Number one is to find out more about him. So it says if the tables were turned, we know how we would want to be approached, right? So certain things we find out about his problems, his drinking habits, blah, blah, blah. We find out some things about him. But the second thing is we offer our way of living to them. So we're going to explain some things about alcoholism to them. And if you're interested, again, for anybody who is new to this meeting, who may be working with other people, there are a lot of clear-cut directions in all of these last 5 chapters. And we do have an outline on our website under the documents page for step 12 summary. I think it's called family orientation. And it goes through all the different paragraphs that are directed towards those tied by blood or affection to the alcoholic. So if you don't feel like, I know, I can just turn to page 54, that's where it said that. Like if you don't remember all that, like it takes a long time to get to that point to get that, but it at least outlines it so that you can start doing this, you know, and you can give them the proper information. All right. So anyhow, you and your husband, top of 118, you and your husband will find that you can dispose of serious problems easier than you can the trivial ones. Next time you and he have a heated discussion, no matter what the subject, it should be the privilege of either to smile and say, this is getting serious. I'm sorry I got disturbed. Let's talk about it later. That's a great conversation if you're a mentor to have with both of them. Things get out of hand. Here's your directions. Either one of you, here's your keyword. This is getting serious. Let's talk about it later. And that for either one, whoever said it, the other one, let's do it. Right? That can just dissolve that right now. I would underline this. If, there's your caveat, if your husband is trying to live on spiritual principles, he will also be doing everything in his power to avoid disagreement or contention. Now, why would he be doing that? Well, he should have learned by now that he is, his number one offender is what? Resentment. So he's going to know that's deadly for him too. So if he's living by spiritual principles, he's going to want to keep things toned down as well. Your husband knows he owes you more than sobriety. There's a good one to underline, right? He owes you more than sobriety. He wants to make good, yet you must not expect too much. Must not expect too much. His ways of thinking and doing are habits of years. Patience, tolerance, understanding, and love are the watchwords. Show him these things in yourself, and they will be reflected back to you from him. Live and let live is the rule. And if you both show a willingness to remedy your own defects, there will be little need to criticize each other. How would I just start focusing on me? Right? Easier said than done, but that's the principle. It's the guiding principle. We women carry with us a picture of the ideal man, the sort of chap we would like our husbands to be. It is the most natural thing in the world, once his liquor problem is solved, to feel that he will, will now measure up to that cherished vision. Because after all, he is now sober, not drunk. He should be everything because he is not drunk. The chances are he will not, for like yourself, he is just beginning in his development. So be patient. Another feeling we are very likely to entertain is one of resentment. Here we go. And I'd underline this, that love and loyalty could not cure our husband of alcoholism. How is this dude he just met helping him far more than my love for him and everything I've done for him or her? Got some nods back there? Yeah. Yeah. How about that? We do not like the thought that the contents of this book, number one, and the work of another alcoholic has accomplished in a few weeks that which we struggled for years. A few weeks is a time reference. Something massively has changed in just a few weeks. We read on page 567 where they talk about a spiritual experience. They give a time frame on the bottom of that page saying this very well should happen in a matter of months. In case any of you are wondering how long it takes to recover, they give a couple of time frames there. This may also happen in a matter of just a few weeks here. At such moments, we forget. Underline, alcoholism is an illness over which we could not possibly have had any power. Alcoholics, we have learned, are beyond human aid, even the love of those closest to us. We are beyond human aid. Sounds like they might need to learn that. There's certain things that in the front of this book that we want to help them to understand so that they don't make mistakes that rise out of ignorance of alcoholism. If nothing else, in your first meeting, that's what we try to do, is at least educate them on alcoholism and what this deal is about. What's wrong with the body? What's wrong with the mind? If you don't buy into it, that's fine. At least we're laying it out there. And if you can come up with a better excuse as to why he goes back out and drinks again when he has everything to lose, all the more power to you. But if you ask him, he probably doesn't even know why. You know, we have an explanation. Your husband will be the first to say it was your devotion and care which brought him to the point where he could have a spiritual experience. Without you, he would have gone to pieces long ago. Would underline this. Here's some clear-cut directions. When resentful thoughts come, try to pause and count your blessings. After all, your family is reunited. Alcohol is no longer a problem. And this might be the most important, you and your husband are working together towards an undreamed of future. That sounds like an extravagant promise? An undreamed of future. Interesting. Still another difficulty is that you may become jealous of the attention he bestows on other people, especially alcoholics. Ooh, this is a big one that I went through. Big one I went through for a lot of years. My wife is not part of what we do here. She doesn't have anything to do with it, which is fine. But she is jealous of the attention that I pay to people that I don't even know. How do you take time, hours at a time, or take phone calls, whatever, and interrupt whatever's going on to work with something you don't even know? You know, I try to explain why we must do this, but that's something that they're saying can be a hazard. So let's talk about this. It's a great thing to explain to a family member very early on. You have been starving for his companionship, yet he spends long hours helping other men and their families. You feel he should now be yours. The fact is, underline, he should start work with other people to maintain his own sobriety. You get that? I believe the very first sentence on page 89 of Working with Others, it says practical experience shows that nothing will so much ensure immunity from drinking as intensive work with other alcoholics. That's about the only sentence you need to point out to him. There's nothing that's going to ensure his immunity as intensive work with other alcoholics, period. So do you want him working with them or not? Nothing's going to do it like that. Sometimes he will be so interested that he becomes really neglectful. Now, this can become a danger too, is when we spend too much time. Because I tell you, you start working with, like, you'll recover, that's great, and you do feel good, and that's what the promises are about that we read, life is wonderful. But it tells you later, and I have found it to be totally true, that is not the end all. They tell you that's actually, you're only scratching the surface when you feel that great. The real greatness of what a spiritual experience is when you actually start working with other people and you start seeing lives get changed. Not about me, but seeing God working through other people. I mean, it's one thing for me to say, well, my life's gotten better. This works. But when I see it happen in other people I'm working with, like, damn, it really does work because I'm seeing it in them. I can always see it in them better than I can see it in me, you know. And our lives get so much better. And it can almost become, I don't want to use the word addiction, but they talk about it here, spiritual intoxication that feels so good. I want to spend every hour doing that. And now we truly are neglecting. There's a point there where we have to work with others, and there's a point where we are becoming selfish with it, right? So we got to find that balance. Your house is filled with strangers. You may not like some of them. He gets stirred up about their troubles, but not at all about yours. It'll do little good if you point that out and urge more attention for yourself. We find it a real mistake to dampen his enthusiasm for alcoholic work. That's a hard one. It's a hard one to choke down. You should join in his efforts as much as you possibly can. Oh, maybe you should be helping others as well. Didn't we read earlier that those who have had their problems solved, that they owe something to those who didn't? Didn't we already read that in this chapter? Those who are tied by blood or affection, if your problems have been solved, you owe something to those other ones to start working with them too. That's the basis of the fellowship of these men and their families. But underline, we suggest that you direct some of your thought to the wives of his new alcoholic friends. They need the counsel and love of women who have gone through what you have. It's probably true that you and your husband have been living too much alone, for drinking has many times isolated the wives of alcoholics. Therefore, you probably need fresh interest and a great cause to live for as much as your husband. If you cooperate rather than complain, you will find that his excess enthusiasm will tone down, highlight, and underline that. That will work itself out as it should. Both of you will awaken to a new sense of responsibility for others. You, as well as your husband, ought to think of what you can put into life instead of how much you can take out. Inevitably, your lives will be fuller for doing so. You will lose the old life and find one much better. Perhaps your husband will make a fair start on the new basis, but just as things are going beautifully, he dismays you by coming home drunk. If you are satisfied, and I'd underline this, here's some clear-cut directions. If you're satisfied, he really wants to get over drinking, you need not be alarmed. Though it is infinitely better that he have no relapse at all, as has been true with many of our men, it is by no means a bad thing in some cases. Your husband, if he's learned this, and I'd underline this, he will see at once that he must redouble his spiritual activities if he expects to survive. Not if he expects to stay sober, if he expects to survive. He will see and understand this at once. You need not remind him of his spiritual deficiency. He'll know it. Cheer him up and ask him how you can still be more helpful. The slightest sign of fear or intolerance may lessen your husband's chance of recovery. It's another good one to underline. It's one that they're going to need to know. In a weak moment, he may take your dislike of his high-stepping friends as one of those insanely trivial excuses to drink. I'd underline this one, very important. You see this on page 101 as well. We never, and then they say never again, we never try to arrange a man's life so as to shield him from temptation. And learn about shielding from temptation? Page 101 will tell you all about that. The slightest disposition on your part to guide his appointments or his affairs so he will not be tempted, it will be noticed. Make him feel absolutely free to come and go as he likes. That's a hard one. But here's the deal. If he's recovered, God has either removed the alcoholic mind or he has not. And if he has, on page 101, it says we can go anywhere in the world. We can go to the most sordid places on earth to be helpful to other people. You know, we don't need to stay out of bars. Or I used to hear a guy in Florida always say, I can't go down the Publix aisle. You know, I can't be reminded of it. Like, what? But he knew something. He learned something from the book. He says, because I still have an alcoholic mind. And I thought, you're right, you do. But you don't know that you can get rid of it. That's what recovered is, right? You should be able to do these things. Let him come and go as he likes. This is important because if he gets drunk, don't blame yourself. Now, this is what I just said, underline. God has either removed your husband's liquor problem or he has not. If not, it better be found out right away. Let's get down to it. Then you and your husband can get right down to the fundamentals. If a repetition is to be prevented, place the problem along with everything else in God's hands. That is our whole deal here. Dependence on God. You want to boil this whole program now. I was thinking about this over the last 2 days. I don't know why. I was thinking, you want to boil this down to just a few words? Let's put God first. If you're putting God first in every department of your life, everything's going to be fine. You don't have to try to shield. They don't have to try to shield. I don't need to avoid temptation. Just put God first. If we can learn to depend on God, everything else is going to work itself out. If we can do that. And to the exact extent that we do that, do we get relief? It says actually in the book, it says, to that exact extent, are we able to match calamity with serenity? And that's why our problems had become unmanageable. We weren't able to match calamity with serenity. When we had calamity come, we made more calamity, right? That's the problem. So we realize that we have been giving you much directions and we have been giving you much advice, not suggestions. We've been giving you directions and we've been giving you advice. We may have seemed to lecture. If that is so, we are sorry, for we ourselves don't always care for people who lecture us. But what we have related is based on our experience. This is not conjecture again. This is based on their experience, some of it painful. We had to learn these things the hard way. That is why we are anxious that you understand and that you avoid these unnecessary difficulties. So to you out there who may soon be with us, we say good luck and God bless you. And that will end that